Hello and good evening, everyone. Magandang gabi sa inyong lahat. I'm John Lim Hap. I'm the community manager of the Filipino .NET Users Group, and I'm also the principal developer in a company called Peña. And yeah, it's a very stormy night tonight in Manila, and it's actually right outside my home. It's flooding right now, and so I hope that everyone watching this stream and all of your colleagues are safe and dry in this evening where we have a typhoon ravaging Manila, and thankfully the thunderstorms are done and um yeah, not audible anymore, but we hope there isn't anymore to come for everyone. So yeah, just wishing everyone is safe, high and dry and warm in wherever they are while watching this stream. Now yes, so tonight we have a very special guest who is actually a bit he's a veteran for from the he started with the Philippine.NET users group some time back, maybe a decade ago or no, a little less than a decade ago, as a young up and coming community leader, but he's now based in Australia and he's continuing his work as a Microsoft MVP there. Michael Peña. He is going to talk to us about the state of .NET on Mac OS. But before we go to his talk, let me just thank a few of our, the people who are helping us out. So first one is the .NET Foundation. Thank you very much to them for hosting our live stream right now, and for also providing a venue for user groups around the world to be broadcasted and live streamed on both on YouTube Live and in other platforms. So yeah, so thank you very much to them. If you want to be able to watch user groups, .NET user group events, Azure group events, cloud events from other countries, and just be able to join them, whether they're from the US, from Europe, or from the Philippines. Yeah, please go to their meetup.com page, meetup.com/.net virtual .NET-virtual-user-group, and join them so that you could see all these events coming around the world, and also subscribe to their channel on YouTube, so that you could be able to see the different user group events, even from the past. And there's also a ton of very nice .NET videos available in that platform. So hit subscribe when you go to their YouTube channel, and yeah, you would see a lot of .NET content from all over the world. Right. So without further ado, he's Microsoft MVP for Azure. He has authored a book called Cloud Analytics with Microsoft Azure, and he now works as a director of his own consulting company, Datachain. Yeah, sorry about that. All right, let's give a warm round of applause wherever you are. Just give a virtual applause to Michael John Peña. So, hi Penny.
Hi everyone. Hi John.
Hello. All right.
How's it going?
So yeah, well, rainy. Yeah, but thank you for being here. So all right, I'll give the floor over to you, and let's move to your topic tonight.
Okay, sounds good.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Thanks everyone for having me. So for today, I'll be talking about the state of .NET on Mac OS, specifically, how you can actually create Mac OS apps using .NET, and a little bit history and what's the current state and what's to look forward, in the future. So a little about me, yes, as mentioned by John, I'm a Microsoft MVP, but for Azure, but formerly a Windows Dev MVP, specifically with Xamarin. And I'm now running my own consulting company here in Sydney, Australia, working on a lot of different projects involving a lot of different technologies, blockchain, .NET, web, mobile, what have you. Um, that's kind of like my day-to-day tinkering under the sun. All right, so just a quick agenda for today. I'll be discussing some nomenclature and definition of terms, because for one, there's just so much happening in .NET and that whole history around it. And second is I'll be discussing different tool sets and IDE in particular. Like if you're jumping to do some coding um, on macOS and you want to use C# and .NET, what are the options around? And I'll be discussing about Mono, Xamarin, .NET 5, and .NET 6, and MAUI at the same time. All right. So to begin with, there is the Mono project started way back, I think 2004, with the idea of having .NET run on Unix or Linux type of systems, so that it's not just running on the Windows ecosystem in particular. So Miguel de Casa is the founder, or the one who started the Mono project, um, and the whole idea there is that if you want to create .NET, if you want to use .NET and C# in particular, how can you actually use Mono to port that and run that on Mac or Linux? So that's kind of like the whole idea there. Um, it's been an interesting journey since then. Like if you're in that early space, it's kind of like a funny story on thinking about that whole old Microsoft ways of thing, wherein like everything's within just the Microsoft ecosystem, with SQL Server, .NET, C#, Visual Studio, um, Windows. They're all kind of like bundled together as a whole. So yeah, Mono was kind of like a very inspirational movement towards making .NET available to all over the platforms. So back then, I'll do a quick demo on how it looks like, just to give you an idea of like, how does it really works for Mono and .NET back in the days. So the whole concept there is that, for example, I have a C# file. In this case, it's just a hello macOS.cs, and I'm using a Visual Studio Code here, but feel free to use any IDE of your choice. So once you've installed Mono, you can do something like CSC and the C# file. Back then, it was still called MSC, which is Mono source compile, but now it's now standardized as CSC. Then it basically runs Mono to create that an executable. In that case, you'll see that you'll have the Mono hello macOS.exe file over there, and then you can do something like Mono hello macOS.exe, and there you go. So simple as that, like a C# code compiled in using Mono, and using Mono, you were able to run the executable and basically get an output on your Mac or on Linux. So um, that's pretty much it in terms of simple command line or simple C# file that you want to target on Linux or on Mac back in the days. And interestingly, they have a lot of shared technologies with Wine technologies, which allows you to run Windows apps on Linux. So back in the day, just a quick nostalgia feel. You can also do something like run an ASP project on Mac or on Linux. When I say ASP, it's not even the ASP.NET MVC. So literally just the ASPX, terminology back then. It's as simple as running an XSP4 and assigning a port where you want to run that one. So if I do that, so now I've created a running like a running self-hosted server, and I can call it the ASPX file. Let me just quickly open a browser and do a localhost 1992 and hello ASP.ASPX. Let me just share that one there. There you go. So simple as that. You were able to run an ASPX file on your Linux or on Mac. So it was all magical, with this technology. That back then it was kind of like um, a second option, or like it's an option if you have an existing ASP project that you want to host on Mac or Linux. Then obviously from there on, .NET has evolved, ASP has evolved, which I'll be talking about in a few. So from Mono, what comes next was Mono Mac, which is basically allowing you to use Mono and target Mac specific libraries. In particular, Kokwa library features like, for example, UI components like storyboarding, the zip file, and whatnot. So Mono Mac allows you to have that native bindings on the macOS APIs. And they are all expressed and exposed as C Sharp. So you can use C Sharp to kind of like develop a macOS app. And under the hood, it follows the same principles wherein you have an app delegate, main entitlements plist, and it uses Xcode really to bundle the app and create the bundle, which is the .app file. So from Monomac, it was relabeled as Xamarin.Mac once the founders created Xamarin, and they continued the development of Mono from there on. So from the Xamarin.Mac native, there comes a newer technology, which I think was introduced around 2011, 2012. Yeah, I did try this one when it was still in beta. And it was called Xamarin Forms. So Xamarin Forms is a cross-platform UI framework that allows you to create a variety of target platforms such as Mac OS, iOS, Android, and Windows. So it's like you have a single cross-platform code base, specifically the UI components on how you actually render those UI components. They're all, transpiled as native, as if how it would look like on macOS button. That's how it's gonna look like. But then the declaration or how you coded it in Xamarin Forms is through C# or SAML or F#. Then what that means for a Xamarin Mac project is that the Xamarin Mac project reference the Xamarin Forms project, wherein the Xamarin Forms creates the app layer or like the UI layer of things. And that's the one being loaded by the native Xamarin.Mac project. Then from there on, a lot of different features, a lot of different evolution happened from there on. A lot of different components, a lot of different cross-platform technologies. In particular, there's like an explosion of conventions with MVVM, with the model view model, and there are like a lot of libraries now wherein it's a single implementation on forms, but they would invoke differently on each platform. For example, storage. So although you're calling it in Xamarin Forms, the way you implement it is still different across different platforms. So that's my demo to Xamarin.Mac and Xamarin Forms. So for that one, I'll be using Visual Studio. Reload from this. Yep. I'll be using Visual Studio for Mac. So just a fun fact, Visual Studio for Mac actually came from Xamarin Studio, and Xamarin Studio came from Mono developed IDE. So it's all progression from there on. So the Visual Studio for Mac didn't actually came from the Visual Studio for Windows. So that's why it lacks some of the features that you're probably familiar with the Visual Studio for Windows. So yeah. All right. So I'm using Visual Studio for Mac. And as I said earlier, a Xamarin.Mac project basically references the Xamarin.Mac library. And at the same time, it follows the same principle as if you're creating a Xcode base. You're using Xcode to create a native Swift or Objective-C project. So you have an app delegate, a main.cs, and a view controller, and a storyboard. So what's interesting with Xamarin for Mac and Visual Studio for Mac in general is that if you open a storyboard, like for example, a main.storyboard, under the hood, it's actually going to open Xcode, and Xcode will actually treat this as if it's an Xcode project. So you see the app delegate becomes now an Objective-C code, and right then whatever, for example, changes that you do here, right? So for example, I changed the hello from Mac to hello from Xamarin.Mac, right? So whenever you do any changes here, right? Okay, let me extend that a bit, right? So whatever changes you do here, once you close it, it will apply now to the Visual Studio for Mac IDE. So if I run that, there you go. Now I have a native macOS app written in C#. And that's all because of Xamarin.Mac library.
Benny, can you zoom in? There is a request for us.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, or at least enlarge of. Thank you.
No worries. Okay, so that's Xamarin for Mac. Now I want to go to the next one, which is Xamarin Forms. Okay, so Xamarin Forms is kind of different, wherein you have two projects in there. So you have a Xamarin Forms project, and you still have the Xamarin.Mac native project, just like what I showed earlier. But what's different here is that, for one, the Xamarin native project references the Xamarin Forms project. Yeah, the one you see here. It references that Xamarin Forms project there, right? And if you look at here in the did finish loading, this actually calls the load application new instance of the app from the Forms project. So the app.xaml from the Forms project, it's actually being called by the app delegate of the native project. So that's really what just happens under the hood. That whatever rendering you do or whatever coding or declaration you have in Xamarin Forms project, it's now loaded inside the native project here. What's interesting though is that on a Xamarin Forms project, besides using MVVM or any convention like that, in Visual Studio for Mac, it now supports the concept of hot reloading. So what that means is that, for example, I close that one. All right, there you go. So this is your native Xamarin.Mac or a native macOS app written in Xamarin Forms, loaded inside the Xamarin native app. The cool thing about doing it in Visual Studio for Mac now is that it now supports a hot reloading. So for example, I want to say Hello, everyone. So, see, you now have a much more real-time kind of like UI prototyping tool that's available. So that's one of the key advantages of using Xamarin Forms when creating a Mac project. Not to mention, the components that you do here on your Xamarin Forms project can actually render natively on different projects. Let's say you want to target iOS as well or Android. So that's, a lot of those components will be shared. Um, some of them might not look exactly the same and you have to tweak them accordingly. So Xamarin Forms allows you to do that. Um, so yes, so if you're creating a UI first, kind of like a project, and you want to target macOS, I would really recommend using Xamarin Forms. But if you'll be spending a lot of time interfacing with the native libraries of of macOS, let's say you want to call the CF networking or location or all those different specific libraries, then a lot of those code will actually be living inside the native macOS project, not on the Xamarin Forms project. But then Xamarin Forms also allows you to call those specific methods within, Xamarin Forms. All right. So, okay. So moving on. Now there is now called something like .NET 5, which actually, the predecessor of this one was called .NET Core, from .NET Core 1 to all the way to 3. Then from 3, they skipped, 4, um, because, with the naming pattern of the .NET Framework 4, it's becoming confusing. So moving forward, it's now just called .NET 5. Um, and again, it didn't. There's still a lot of confusion on what really is .NET 5, in particular with how does it apply to Mac OS, right? So what does .NET 5 really means for Mac OS? Um, so by definition, .NET 5 or .NET Core is a general purpose framework that doesn't just target Windows anymore. So it's now using a self-hosted technology that allows you to use Linux or Mac OS to host a .NET Core or .NET 5 application. Now, what that means for Mac is that, for example, you are creating an ASP.NET project, right? Within the ASP.NET family. Let's say Blazor, Web API, gRPC, React, Angular, Vue, server rendered, web apps. They'll work on macOS, right? Because you're treating macOS as your host of those apps, right? For example, console apps, worker services, machine learning, IoT, Docker. Um, they can use macOS as the host of those apps. What .NET 5 doesn't do is that it doesn't really interface with the Cocoa libraries that we have on the Xamarin.Mac project that I showed you earlier. So it's not yet there. So what that means is that .NET 5 doesn't really interface directly with those, not just in Mac OS, same with Xamarin Mac, Xamarin iOS, and Xamarin Android. So it's not yet a single kind of like underlying framework that calls those bindings. And up until this point, with .NET 5, with Xamarin Forms and Xamarin Mac, it under the hood it still uses Mono and those related technologies to call those bindings. Um, and that's where that whole one .NET family would come into place eventually in the future, like .NET 7 and in particular. Um, so just wait, it's gonna get there at some point. But for now, what it means is that if you want to use .NET 5, you can create this different type of applications, but not really a Mac specific, you know, kind of library bindings. But then alternatively, what I discovered is that since you're treating Mac OS as a server rather than you're creating an app that will be installed on Mac OS, you can actually call some system variables and call the command line interface, such as the airport and stuff like that. So that's just something to think of. For example, you want to see who's currently logged in, so you can still use the system variables, like system environment variables like username, and those different properties that you can look at. All right, over to the demo of .NET 5. In particular, I'll be demoing web and worker service. So for this one, I'll be using a different IDE, which is called Rider. Okay, so I got two projects here. So I'll probably start with the worker service first, which is a much more straightforward project. So let me just increase the font. Okay. So one of the advantages of using Rider is that if you're impressed with ReSharper back in the Windows days, or back in the Windows environment, so this actually uses or leverages a lot of those smarts of ReSharper. So it's very ideal. If you want to look at those specific premium features of an IDE. So for example, here, right? So it's actually showing me that this can be improved, like rename the property to time, capital T instead. So yeah, one of the advantages of using the Rider IDE. Not to mention, if you're also familiar with the wider JetBrains ecosystem, with Android Studio. So this might be a very useful tool for you as well. So basically, this is just a simple a worker service application that allows you to create a host builder and basically add this worker class as a hosted service. So this worker class here, what it does is just running a nonstop until it's canceled, a nonstop logging of just saying that networker on macOS running at this time, and generating a random number. So if I run that in Rider, it comes with obviously a console and an output previewer of what's happening. And there you go. So I can debug this, debug this or execute this on Rider, no problem with that one. So, but then another fun fact, or one of the, if you want this worker service to be a Mac OS application, there's actually a way to do it. So that's where a tool called Platypus comes into play. So Platypus allows you to kind of like wrap a any sort of like executable that and kind of like wrap that as a .app bundle. So what it means is that since the .NET Core or .NET 5 app is self-hosted, meaning you don't need to install the .NET framework and all those underlying application dependencies. It can run on its own, right? So all you just have to do is to make sure that you target the Mac OS runtime when creating a publish folder. So what that means is that when you do a .NET publish, just need to make sure that it's a .NET publish with a runtime of OS X-64. Okay, so I did that already, and with Platypus, I was able to kind of like create this .app file, and if I run that, you have options as well to choose whether you want to run the app as a just run in the background, or do you need root privileges and whatnot. So that's another option to look at if you, for example, you're creating schedulers or timers or different kind of like applications that you want to use on Mac OS. All right. So moving on to still on .NET 5, the next one that I want to show you is that let me just cancel that. Quit. Is a simple ASP.NET Web API project, a .NET 5 Web API project. So, but what's interesting here is that this workflow here, back in the days, let me just zoom that in. So back in the days, this whole workflow, it's almost impossible to do, or very hard to do on Mac OS, because in particular, even if you have the IDE, maybe you don't have the underlying dependencies in the tools. So what I want to show is that if you're, for example, you're still gonna have SQL Server as a backend, backend database, and you're gonna create an API, and you're using Mac. So this is probably an option to look at on, kind of like a setup to look at. So this is just a standard, it's just a standard web API project, nothing really different. But what I want to show you is that I created a, for the Docker DB context using Entity Framework Core. Right. So I can actually interface to a SQL server running on this Mac OS machine that I'm using right now. But obviously, that's only possible with, at least right now, with Docker. So with Docker, you can actually pull in the SQL Server for Linux image and run it, in your Mac OS environment. And just with Docker, you have your own SQL Server instance running on your Mac. And with that, you can use an IDE called Azure Data Studio to actually like perform some basic queries around it. And there you have it. You have a workflow end to end. So if I run the this project here, right? So with Rider, it also supports that whole launching launching a browser and launching Swagger. There you go, right? So that the familiar environment that you're probably used to in Windows or not, or if you want to have the same type of workflow, you can have it here. So for example, I want to add an item is PHINUG with a dot in between, and it's enabled true. Simple. And there you go. From there, I'm gonna open back Azure Data Studio and perform a query. And there you go. All right, the value is inserted there. And with obviously, since this is an ASP.NET project and entity framework, you have all those different startup conventions and properties that you can do. Like for example, if the environment is development, you can ensure that the database is deleted and created, use Swagger and whatnot. So they are all very much supported running on Mac OS. And in Rider, in particular, you can have configurations wherein, for example, like if you want to add environment variables such as setting the ASP.NET Core environment equals development. So all of them, you can now set them up either on Rider or on your command line. All right, so moving on. Now, I want to talk about MacCatalyst. So MacCatalyst is basically an evolution of the Mac OS ecosystem. This is outside of the .NET family. So MacCatalyst is basically sharing more and more SDKs between Mac OS and iPad, and having a more unified components like pop-up buttons, tooltips, Windows sidebar, and whatnot. So what that means for Mac is that on .NET 6, it's now one of the supported workloads. All right. So on .NET 6 plus MAUI, there are now some more shared libraries, but not all of them yet, between Xamarin Mono and the full .NET Framework family. And they've now introduced a concept of workload. For example, you still want to target the native Mac OS project, or binding libraries. You just have to install that workload. Then if you want to use MacCatalyst, which is again the bridging between Mac and iPad, you can also do that. Or if you want to use MAUI, which is the UI cross-platform UI framework, then you can just add that as a workload as well. So to keep it simpler, so Xamarin.Mac has now evolved as Microsoft Mac OS as a workload. Then Xamarin.MacIOS, which is a combination of some of the Mac and iOS libraries, plus MacCatalyst, they're now all bundled in as Microsoft MacCatalyst. And Xamarin Forms plus UWP, which is the Universal Windows Framework platform, is now merging towards what it's called MAUI. All right. So to give you a quick demo of .NET 6, MacCatalyst, and MAUI, I'd like to show you some of these very experimental demos here. Right. So all of this might crash without further notice. So please bear with me. All right, cd.net 6. Right, let me just put that here. So let me start first with hello macOS. All right. So with the hello macOS here, what's different this time is that it still uses the same app delegate, main class, and whatnot. But if you look at the CS proj, you're now targeting the framework .NET 6.0-macOS, and the runtime identifier is OSX-64. So what I want to show you here is that it's a simple app that's kind of like crazy at the same time. So the command right now is to run this project is to do a .NET build, the CS proj with the -t :run, and the target framework, which is .NET 6.0-macOS. So if I do that, it's gonna bundle this as a macOS project, but by the way, while this is loading, this is not yet available on Visual Studio for Mac and JetBrains Rider. So if you're doing .NET 6, in particular targeting Mac OS, there's no debugger support yet. So it's all kind of like a preview at this point. So there you go. What just happened here is that a .NET 6 project, right, targeting Mac OS, I was able to call the native pop-up of Mac OS library, but come look here. Okay, so if I go to the app delegate, what I did is that I actually created a host builder. So I created a host builder, a worker service running inside a Mac OS native app, and that worker.cs is inside, it's a running worker service inside macOS native and calling a native um, core WLAN namespace or a library and do an NS alert, which the pop-up that you just showed, that you just saw. So funny, right? I mean, crazy, but it's so exciting to see that back then this is not yet supported on Mac OS, but yeah, the Microsoft extensions hosting, it's now possible to run on Mac OS on a Mac OS native project. So very, very exciting. So just imagine all those libraries, all those projects that you were running exclusively for Windows or for web apps. Eventually, some of them will be shared and can be used for Mac OS or even iOS or Android. So that's the power of that one .NET family. All right, so moving on to the next demo. All right, now I want to show the MacCatalyst. All right, so what's different in MacCatalyst is that, again, it's, instead of the target framework now becomes .NET 6.0, targeting MacCatalyst. Okay, and the identifier is different because this app can also run on iPad, not just on Mac OS. So to run that, very similar command. All right. Oh, sorry. Okay. .NET build hello MacCatalyst. There you go. Targeting .NET 6.0 MacCatalyst. All right. Just be patient. Still compiling. All right. There you go. It's loading. So, yep, there you go. A .NET app that can run on iPad OS, and Mac OS using MacCatalyst. So very simple as that one. So if you're already targeting a Mac OS app, maybe for example you're creating UI specific ones, then you can use this MacCatalyst project for that one. All right. So last demo is MAUI. Okay. So MAUI, just like what I said earlier, is similar to Xamarin Forms, right? So it has its XAML files, a main page XAML and whatnot. Okay. Let me just make sure. Oh, not that one. Okay. So same. Okay, I'm still in Catalyst projects. Let me go to Hello Maui. All right. So let me do a .NET build. Hello. Maui. And still targeting .NET 6 MacCatalyst. But oh, all right. But then I'm using XAML to actually render the UI of it, similar to Xamarin Forms. So the Hello Maui CS proj file, if you look at it, this is where you can kind of like set some target frameworks and like target runtime identifiers such as MacCatalyst and simulators and stuff like that. So you see, you still have the MacCatalyst project over there under the hood. But what it means is that if you have an existing Xamarin Forms app, right? So moving to MAUI eventually allows you to target MacCatalyst as well. having a more unified UI approach, then eventually will also work for Windows UWP app, such as not just the Windows 10, Windows 11, even Xbox and the Surface. And there you go. It's a MAUI app, all in XAML, right? And running on macOS Catalyst, macOS and MacCatalyst. So this exact imagine you have your XAML app on Xamarin Forms, move to MAUI. You can now use that same code base to um, make it work on not just on macOS but on iPad OS as well. All right, so I hope you had fun with all those demos. Very exciting stuff. So watch, carefully. Watch out for all of those announcements with .NET 6 MAUI. It's very exciting time. So yeah. So for resources, I made this repository open source. It's in my GitHub. Just look for MJT Peña Mac.NET samples and look at MacCatalyst on Apple. You'll see a lot of those resources available, and obviously .NET blog and that .NET MAUI samples, and at the same time Mono project. So thanks for watching, and if you want to contact me, here are my details. I'm available on email, go to my website, or Twitter or LinkedIn. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Penny, for all of that, and it's really, um, yeah, a big set of exciting features and developments. And it was surprising to me actually because I hadn't been following Xamarin as much. That a big part of the existing framework still based on the old mono
Mm-hmm.
mono frameworks being I guess just being developed forward and upgraded through the years, even as .NET itself changed to .NET Core. But of course, we all know
Yeah,
that Mono was the catalyst for them to actually
exactly.
do the whole .NET Core
Mhm.
movement. No? Um,
Siguro
um,
parang ano no, at the same time, in the future, like this will be like a funny thing, but this will become a reality wherein, for example, you have a WPF app
yeah.
targeting a Windows desktop, let's say Windows 7 or Windows XP pa even, di ba? Or
Hmm.
now, a lot of those code base can now be used on MAUI. And imagine that running on an iPad OS or Mac
Yeah,
OS.
exactly,
So,
exactly. I was I was an iOS developer 10 years ago, 11 years ago. In the early days of the iPhone, and when I was looking at the code, well, I've always known that Xamarin still uses the native stuff, right? The
yeah,
NS things. But once you showed us the Mac OS stuff and then NS label and that reminds me so much of my Objective C days, and yeah,
exactly.
but I mean, barely anybody remembers those anymore.
And not to mention, right, on the Xamarin Mac project right now, you can also call native Swift binding libraries, or let's say you created a library
Exactly.
on Swift or Objective-C,
Mhm.
you can also call that to Xamarin Mac, and vice versa as well. You can create a .NET library targeting Xamarin Mac, just a portable library for your Swift project. So it's all coming
Exactly.
together.
Right. Yeah. We do have one question from the from the audience. Is from Marcelius. The pin looks like Maui has a transpiler to those targeted frameworks. How does it work under the hood? I guess that's what he was asking.
Right. Okay. So under the hood, it's very similar to Xamarin Forms. Okay. So basically, right, it's a mix of Xamarin Forms and the .NET 6. All those core CLR magic happening under the hood. But then the same principle applies wherein with your Xamarin Forms, it converts itself into a native project, and the way you like compile that native project is still the way on how you do it and to create that bundle. So what that means is that, for example, what I just showed earlier with MAUI for macOS, what happened is that from MAUI, it became it was all encapsulated by the the Mac, MacCatalyst project, uh, targeting the native binding libraries of of Cocoa, Swift, and whatnot. And then under the hood, it's still Xcode doing the work to create the dot app, diba? Or
Yeah.
actually compiling it. So that's what's really happening there. So same principle applies for Android, iOS, diba?
Mhm.
Whatever is the native tool to compile it, that's how it works.
Yeah, so basically you still need, just like if for Android you still need the underlying Android framework
Mm-hmm.
to do the compilation. Here you will still need
Yes,
Xcode to
exactly.
do the compilation to the ultimate
Exactly.
Mac native binaries and
Mm-mm.
all of that. All right, yeah,
Which is
that's
which is a very good thing in a way, right? Because
mhm.
one, it's not a web application, right? It's
Yeah,
not a it's you're not loading it in a browser or of some
it's
sort
not.
or a wrapper,
Yeah,
right? It's a
yeah.
native, project.
Yeah, yeah. Although of course those the believers of WebAssembly and and Electron type of
Mm.
applications will always say that no, we could do the same things and all of that. But yeah, yeah. So some of them
I mean,
would
yeah, I mean, you can display things, right? But then the moment you want to interface to, like libraries of Swift or, libraries of macOS, like interfacing with your networking, location, or Bluetooth, then that means you have to create your own C library or whatever you want to do it,
yeah,
diba? To
yeah,
actually implement
yeah,
those.
yeah. Speaking of which, do things. I'm just not familiar with Xamarin development. I mean, I haven't touched mobile development for quite a while. How about things like NuGet packages, or other shared libraries from either side of the pond, whether it's from um .NET or from Mac shared libraries or I don't know, Mac OS shared libraries, if there are those that are available, can they be referenced at the same time, for example, in these
Right.
kinds of projects?
Um, Actually, I mean, the answer is may exist. There's already an existing way of doing it. So that's
Mhm.
called the .NET standard.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
the .NET Standard 2.1 basically means is that it works anywhere. All
yeah,
.NET project,
yeah.
it works anywhere, right?
So that's
But
for the
then, for
NuGet
example,
part. Yeah,
yes, that's for the NuGet part, diba? So for example, you want to create a simple regex, regex kind of project or FizzBuzz or anything like that, right? So it's all like from the native .NET libraries, no platform specific libraries, they're all going to work because they're all generic enough, but nothing specific for a platform. So
Yep.
that's already existing, right? So same applies moving forward. .NET 6.7 onwards,
Mhm.
it's still
Mhm.
going to be the
That's
.NET standard, right?
that's still going to work in the same mechanism.
Yes,
Yeah.
in the future, what might happen is that they've introduced the concept of workloads, wherein you have a base .NET 6,
Mm-hmm.
right? Then you choose or install a workload and target it,
Mm-hmm.
and that's the workload. Like for example, in order for it to be a Mac OS app, you need to install the workload so that those Mac OS native libraries becomes available to you.
Oh, all right. So the concept of a workload, is this something that came from what, Maui, or is it something that came from the Mac
That .NET
side?
6, it come from the
It's
.NET
from
6 itself.
.NET 6. So basically, you could all of this would be available on .NET 6, but not on .NET 5.
.NET, not yet. So .NET
Not
5
yet.
technically is still .NET Core. That's why there's still an
Yeah,
emphasis on
yeah,
my
yeah,
end
yeah,
that it's still
exactly.
.NET Core. Yeah.
Just they just got rid of the core name and all that.
Mm,
Yeah, yeah. All right. But .NET 6 is already in preview, and it's actually
mhm,
in the preview. So yeah, we're already starting to see things from .NET MAUI, and we're getting all this exciting
Yeah.
you know
So yeah,
possibilities. Yeah.
exactly, right? So think of it, yung mga like the gold, the old cryptography libraries that you did back in 2003, 2005.
Mhm.
Imagine leveraging those, targeting .NET Standard or .NET 6 onwards. Then what that means is that you can apply that same for iPad, right? iOS and
Yeah,
Mac.
exactly.
So
So yeah,
a
so
lot of
so
comebacks happening.
so being able to write apps for iPad Pros, for example.
Yes, iPad Pros. Yeah. So
That's
imagine
pretty.
those medical funky
Yeah, the
booking
charting
system written in
stuff. Yeah.
WPF or even Windows Forms. Imagine that running on an iPad Pro natively.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Windows Forms on iPad would be both, amazing and a crime. I think. No disrespect to people
Mm.
still doing Windows Forms, but but it would be fun. It would be amusing
Yep.
to see those there. um I guess the other thing that I wanted to move to is the development environment. So you used three different development
Mhm.
environments in this demo. You used Visual Studio for Mac, you used Visual Studio Code, and you used JetBrains Rider. And as I understand it, you only used Visual Studio Code because it was the only one that could run .NET 6 at this time,
At
right?
this
It is
point,
not support. Yeah, and it's not yet supported.
well, not really
In the,
Visual Studio, right? Any IDE and a shell in particular. That's the only way to do it right now. Yeah.
yeah, that's true. All right, so given that, if I put Visual Studio for Mac and JetBrains Rider, pit them against each other, yeah, pros and cons. What do people need to know?
All right. So I'll start with Rider. Okay. So big con. Well, not really con, but it's not free, right? So
Yeah.
you have to pay for it. So but then that's what you pay for JetBrains Rider is inbuilt resharper. Yeah, a lot of those code analysis tools. Like for example, let me just show you here. More than Jet, you can also do some code cleanup on a solution level. Those all those capabilities you can do that using Rider. Reformat code, auto indents, everything. Um, yeah, so that thing is not available neither on VS Code nor Visual Studio for Mac at this point,
Mhm.
right?
Okay.
These are all premium features that you kind of like get used to, or like a premium that you pay as part of the resharper conveniences around things, right? Same thing with a very if you're familiar, if you're into unit testing, it's a very mature test runner. I would say, compared
Yeah.
to Visual Studio for Mac, right? So it's
Yeah.
very comparable to what you have on Windows. So
Yeah.
that's the biggest pros on my end. That's why I like Rider when I'm on Mac, right? But then, advantage of using Visual Studio for Mac is that if you're specifically targeting Mac, right,
hmm
or iOS,
hmm
then it's a much convenient
It's much more
IDE.
integrated.
It's much more integrated, right? Just
All
like what
right.
I showed earlier with with the storyboard file, diba, na
Yeah,
if
yeah,
you
yeah. It goes directly to
if
the
you
to the designer. Yeah,
exactly, right, it goes straight to
and
it fires up
and
Xcode. So
yeah, it
that
can
whole
go
thing, it's
exported and
much more
stuff.
integrated on Visual Studio for Mac,
All
diba?
right, all
So
right.
um yes, and at the same time, Visual Studio for Mac, the community, it's for free. So compared to JetBrains Rider, so which is a big pro of it.
Mm.
Um, yeah,
I've got
that's
an
pretty much really it.
interesting. I've got an interesting comment here for Jeremy. Thank you for saying this. Personally, I like moving between Rider VS Map. and VS Code, and I use them interchangeably on a lot of things. So yeah,
Yes.
I guess yeah. I guess
Eh,
if you really want to be efficient in your workflow, there's that option to move
yeah,
around that.
exactly.
Yeah, yeah,
So yeah, it's really, at the end of the day, it's preference, right? Um,
yeah.
if I mean other people, maybe you don't want Visual Studio at all. Maybe you just want to use Vim or or
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Emacs or
Emacs. Yeah, and yeah, I do command line all the time.
mm,
Yeah, that would be that would be a preference between people.
yeah.
I guess. Yeah. All right.
But
Well.
probably moving forward, I think
Mhm.
the VS Code would have more traction on this environment in the future, mainly because there are tons of extensions and themes right now.
Yeah.
Sobrang
Yeah.
explode na yung community ng VS Code. So
Yeah.
think of that something you can also leverage now if you want to create iOS or macOS apps.
True enough. True enough. True enough. But one thing that really got me curious about this whole issue is why isn't there any active development happening on VS Visual Studio for Mac? It looks like the last time I touched Visual Studio for Mac was what 2015 maybe or 2016, and it looks like it doesn't it didn't change or there wasn't much development on it. I always I'm like I want to knock at Microsoft door and guys, this ID is stale.
Well, I mean, for one, I mean, since the last time you saw it or the last time you actually touched it was the hot reload. That was
Hmm?
kind of like not really
Okay.
super new, right? But that's kind of like a major feature that was added on PS for Mac.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
yeah. Other than that, it also supports extensions from community. Um,
Yeah.
Probably another thing is that if you're targeting macOS and iOS, this whole integration with Apple developer account is also very useful. So with the signing and bundling and whatnot, this is very
Hmm.
useful.
Hmm. Yeah, I think Jeremy should already jump with us in this colony. He says that there's actually a lot of active
Yep.
development on PS4 map, and yeah, um, yeah, VS 2022 for preview for Mac is nice, and I guess it's available for everyone
Yep.
who has a Mac. All right. Yeah, thank you for those comments, Jeremy. All right. Yeah. Unless there are any other questions from our audience, if you have anything that's on your mind, please type them in quickly and in the live streams, whether you're out in Facebook or in YouTube. Yeah, but um, otherwise, any last words for us, Michael, that you would
Last
like
words.
to well, not last words, parting words. Or
All right.
all
Um,
right.
Okay, so I think my parting words, right? So again, it's a very good time to be a .NET developer.
Yeah.
Xamarin's not dead. So I know there's been a lot of commotion around the rise
Uh-huh.
of other cross-platform frameworks, Flutter, React Native, thinking Xamarin
Yes.
is
Yes.
dead.
Exactly.
It's
Mhm.
not. It's actively maintained. There are a lot of if you're looking at bindings between the native one, like previews and whatnot, Xamarin is very active, and I would assume the same would happen with Maui moving forward. So
Mhm.
it's a very interesting time to still use your C# skills, .NET
Yeah.
skills.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
you want yeah,
It's very
it's
very
really
interesting.
siguro I don't know, parting word. I think the real vision of Code One runs everywhere. It's now becoming true with .NET instead of
Yes.
the other one.
Where code ones debug everywhere. You've heard about that. All right. let's not say any bad things about our friends. Yeah, but yes, interesting time. Blazor, for example,
Blazor, yep.
is also holding great potential, and I'm seeing .NET MAUI now is it's really interesting
So,
times.
and at the same time, I think there are also a lot of opportunities, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because these are all new, fresh. Think of it like creating more components, creating a lot of those different frameworks, libraries, projects. Yeah, a lot of opportunities there.
All right, all right. Yes, definitely a lot of exciting things in the .NET world. All right, so I guess we're kind of out of time. So thank you very much, uh, Mr. Michael John Peña. Thank you for being here,
Thanks for
and
inviting me.
yeah, yeah, no worries. We wish you all the best, and yeah, thank you for being with us.
Thank you, thank
Okay,
you.
thank you. All right, so that ends our Philippine.NET Users Group online dev sessions for July. Thank you very much for everybody in Manila. I hope you stay safe. The rain's still going and the thunderstorms are still raging. So keep safe, keep dry, everyone, keep warm, and I hope to see you again in our next live stream. And yeah, thank you to everyone who has watched and supported us. Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. Thank you for all those very nice comments, and thank you to all our live stream viewers who had been around. We've seen viewers from as far as Saudi Arabia, Africa, Turkey, various other countries. We really appreciate having you with us. So with that, we have to say goodbye. Maraming salamat sa inyong lahat. Magandang gabi. I'm John Linhap, and this is the Philippine.NET Users Group. Thank you. Good night.